The crystal chandeliers cast harsh shadows across the antique dinner plates as my father's fist came down on the mahogany table, making the fine china rattle. Sunday dinners at the Harrison mansion had long since devolved from family gatherings into weekly tribunals, where my supposed failures were served alongside Martha's perfectly roasted duck. "Another year, another disappointment," Richard Harrison declared, his CEO voice echoing through our formal dining room. He used the same tone in Harrison Medical Group board meetings. I'd heard it often enough from outside closed doors. I pushed the peas around my plate, my white coat from the hospital still draped over the chair behind me. The embroidered Dr. Sarah Harrison medicine felt like a brand of shame in this room, where anything less than chief of surgery was considered settling. "Did you even attempt to apply for the surgical residency this year?" Mom asked, adjusting her pearls, a nervous habit she'd developed over decades of playing the perfect hospital board member's wife. "James got it on his first attempt, you know. Top of his class." "Emergency medicine is my passion," I replied quietly, though I'd explained this 100 times before. "I like being on the front lines making split-second decisions that save lives." James smirked from across the table, perfect in his tailored Armani suit. He'd changed the moment his shift ended. Image was everything in the Harrison family. "Front lines? You mean glorified triage? Real doctors save lives in the OR, little sister. How many surgeries did you perform today?" "Oh wait. I saved 3 lives today," I countered, thinking of the cardiac arrest I'd managed while James was doing his scheduled elective procedures. A 50-year-old man who collapsed in the parking lot. I got his heart started again in under 2 minutes. A stroke patient I diagnosed so early the clot busters actually reversed her symptoms. And a 4-year-old with bacterial meningitis that 6 other doctors had missed. "And I performed 2 heart transplants," James shot back, swirling his expensive red wine. "But who's counting?" "Right, the board is. Always counting, always watching." Dad nodded approvingly at his son, his heir apparent. "Speaking of the board, tomorrow's meeting will be interesting. We're discussing the future leadership of Harrison Medical. Your grandmother would have turned 70 tomorrow." My stomach clenched at the mention of Grandma Eleanor. She'd built Harrison Medical from a single clinic into a network of 12 hospitals, revolutionizing patient care in the process. But she'd passed away 3 months ago, leaving everything in Dad's hands, or so he thought. "I assume you'll name James as your successor?" Mom beamed at her golden child, already planning the press releases in her head. The youngest chief of surgery in the hospital's history, following in his father's footsteps. "Naturally," Dad agreed, cutting into his duck with surgical precision. "We need someone with surgical expertise, business acumen, and—" He glanced dismissively at me. "Proper ambition. The Harrison name means something in this city." I gripped my fork tighter, remembering Grandma's last words to me in the ear, where she'd insisted on being treated despite James offering his private surgical suite. "Sometimes the quiet ones surprise you most, dear," she'd whispered, her knowing eyes twinkling even through the pain. "Keep watching. Keep learning. Keep quiet until it's time." The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 8, its deep resonance mixing with the clink of silverware and the weight of unspoken tensions. Every Sunday for the past 5 years since I'd chosen emergency medicine over surgery, this dinner table had been my weekly penance. "Sarah," Mom sighed using her concerned voice, "you could at least try for an administrative position. Something more suitable for a Harrison woman. The clinic management track, perhaps." "I'm exactly where I need to be," I replied, thinking of the research I'd been quietly conducting, the improvements I'd implemented in the ER protocols, the lives saved because I'd chosen to work in the trenches instead of the ivory tower of surgery. James laughed, the sound sharp and dismissive. "Where you need to be. The ER is where medical careers go to die. No Harrison has ever stayed in emergency medicine. It's beneath us." "Your grandmother started as an ER doctor," I reminded him quietly. "And she had the good sense to move up," Dad snapped. "She built an empire from nothing. What are you building, Sarah? Besides a reputation for wasting your potential?" The butler entered then, his usually impassive face betraying unusual tension. "Mr. Harrison, there's a Mr. Blackwood on the line. From Blackwood and Associates." Dad frowned, recognition flashing across his face. "Eleanor's lawyers? Put them through to my study." They insist on speaking to the whole family, sir. They've initiated video conference. The massive screen on the dining room wall flickered to life, revealing a distinguished man in his 60s. Good evening, Harrison family. I apologize for interrupting dinner, but tomorrow's announcement cannot wait. I straightened in my chair, remembering all those quiet afternoons spent with Grandma in her office, discussing hospital administration, patient care philosophy, and the future of medicine. While James was showing off in the OR, I'd been learning from the woman who built an empire. My time for silence was ending. What announcement? Dad demanded, his knuckles white around his wine glass. I'm handling the succession plans. The board meeting tomorrow is a mere formality. Actually, Mr. Harrison, you're not. Mr. Blackwood adjusted his glasses, the video feed catching the gleam of his gold cufflinks, Grandma's preferred payment for decades of loyalty. Eleanor Harrison's will has very specific instructions about the future of Harrison Medical Group. James straightened his tie, a habit he'd developed during his rise to chief of surgery. We all know Grandma wanted the company to stay in surgical hands. She built this empire on surgical excellence. That's where you're wrong, Dr. Harrison, the lawyer replied, his tone carrying decades of courtroom authority. Eleanor left extremely detailed instructions about the true heir to her medical empire. Instructions that, until this moment, only I have been privy to. Mom reached for her wine glass, her hand trembling slightly. Well, obviously it's James. He's chief of surgery, top of his class at Harvard Medical, youngest department head in. The sole heir, Mr. Blackwood continued, speaking over her practiced bragging, is in that room right now. And before you continue singing Dr. James Harrison's praises, you should know that Eleanor specifically excluded him from succession. The duck grew cold on bone china plates as silence descended over the dining room. James's face flushed red, a vein pulsing in his temple. The same look he got when a surgery didn't go perfectly to plan. What do you mean, excluded? Dad's voice was dangerous, quiet. CEO voice. James is the only logical choice. Sarah's just an ER doctor, for God's sake. Mr. Blackwood's image leaned forward slightly. Would you like to know what Eleanor actually wrote about the ER department, Mr. Harrison? Let me quote directly from her private notes. The heart of any hospital beats in its emergency room. Anyone who doesn't understand that doesn't deserve to run one, let alone 12. I felt warmth spread through my chest, Grandma's words, her philosophy, her validation of everything I'd been fighting for. This is ridiculous. James stood, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. I've spent 15 years preparing to take over. I've attended every board meeting, every charity gala, every photo opportunity. I finished quietly, finding my voice. Every chance to be seen. All eyes turned to me as I stood, still in my wrinkled scrubs beneath my white coat. For the first time, I didn't feel underdressed in our formal dining room. While you were posing for the hospital newsletter, I continued, meeting James's furious gaze, I was implementing a new triage system that reduced wait times by 40%. While you were playing golf with board members, I was developing protocols that cut our emergency response time in half. Protocols? James scoffed. You think protocols compare to what I do in the OR? Mr. Blackwood cleared his throat. Eleanor was quite clear about what matters most. She wrote, and I quote, "Surgery saves one life at a time. Systems save thousands." Mom's wine glass clattered against the table. But all those years of planning. James was groomed for this. No, I corrected her. James groomed himself for this. Grandma was grooming me. The lawyer nodded, shuffling some papers. Ms. Harrison is correct. For the past 5 years, Eleanor had Sarah reviewing quarterly reports, attending private strategy sessions, and developing new care protocols. All while maintaining her position in the ER, I might add. Dad's face had gone from red to purple. Those meetings, those were about improving emergency protocols. They were about learning to run an empire, I said softly. From the ground up, just like Grandma did. She taught me that you can't lead what you don't understand, and you can't understand what you're too proud to touch. Mr. Blackwood held up a thick folder. I have here the complete succession plan, including Ms. Sarah Harrison's proposals for expanding emergency care across all 12 hospitals, implementing her award-winning triage protocol system-wide, and establishing 3 new trauma centers in underserved areas. Award-winning. James sputtered. What awards? I pulled out my phone showing them the email I'd received last week. The Catherine Morris Award for Innovation in Emergency Medicine. The ceremony is next month. Grandma nominated me before she died. Eleanor was quite proud, Mr. Blackwood added. She said, and again I quote, Sarah understands what James never will, that true leadership isn't about being seen, it's about seeing others. The lawyer's image was replaced by a document, Grandma's succession plan, with my name clearly listed as CEO and chairwoman of the board. This can't be legal, Dad whispered, but the fight had drained from his voice. I assure you it's ironclad, Mr. Blackwood replied. Eleanor spent years ensuring this transition would be seamless. The board has already been briefed. They're expecting Sarah at tomorrow's meeting, as their new CEO. I reached into my white coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The last note Grandma had pressed into my hand before she died. I'd carried it every day since, waiting for this moment. Would you like to know what else Grandma wrote? I asked, unfolding her final message. I smoothed out Grandma's note, her elegant handwriting still crisp on the expensive stationery she'd always favored. The dining room hung in suffocating silence, even James momentarily stunned into speechlessness. My dearest Sarah, I read aloud, when this letter finds its way to light, you'll finally be standing in your truth. They never saw you coming. That was our greatest advantage. Dad slumped in his chair, looking suddenly older. All those emergency department budget meetings were actually executive training sessions, I confirmed. While you were teaching James how to command a boardroom, Grandma was teaching me how to build one from scratch. Mr. Blackwood's image reappeared on the screen. If I may continue with the formal announcements? The transition takes effect at midnight. Ms. Harrison's first board meeting as CEO will commence at 9 a.m. tomorrow. Mom's hands fluttered to her throat, clutching her pearls. But what about the Stevens merger? James has been working on that for months. You mean the merger I quietly restructured last week? I pulled out my tablet, displaying the new terms. The deal James negotiated would have cost us 3 emergency departments. I found a way to expand them instead. Impossible, James snapped. I've been over those numbers 100 times. While looking down from the surgical floor, I noted. I looked up from the ER. Different perspective, different solutions. My phone buzzed. A message from the hospital. Excuse me, I said, reading the alert. The trauma center just received multiple casualties from a highway pileup. I need to go. Now. Dad exploded. In the middle of this coup? This isn't a coup, I corrected him, standing and straightening my white coat. This is exactly what Grandma built this company for. Putting patients before pride, care before conquest. I turned to Mr. Blackwood. Have the transition papers sent to the ER. I'll sign them between cases. You can't run a medical empire from the emergency room. James protested. Watch me, I replied. Grandma did it for 15 years before moving upstairs. Did none of you ever wonder why she insisted on keeping her ER credentials active? The lawyer nodded approvingly. Eleanor mentioned you'd say that. She left instructions for the board to expect their new CEO to maintain clinical duties. A leader who forgets what the trenches feel like, she wrote, soon forgets why we built the hospital in the first place. I moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and James? Those 2 heart transplants today. The organs were procured through a donation system I implemented last year. Even your surgical victories depend on someone handling the emergency groundwork. Sarah, Mom called out, her voice small. What happens now? I turned back, seeing my family with new eyes. No longer my judges, just people who'd been playing a game whose rules had changed without their knowledge. Now we build something bigger than ourselves. Grandma showed me how an empire should work. From the ground up, not the top down. I checked my phone again. The ambulances are 10 minutes out. I have lives to save. And the company? Dad asked, looking lost without his iron grip on power. We'll be there tomorrow, I assured him. But unlike some people in this room, I understand that every emergency department minute can mean the difference between life and death. Mr. Blackwood can handle the paperwork. I'm needed in the ER. As I strode out of the dining room, I heard James's incredulous voice. She's really going to run a billion-dollar company from the emergency room? Mr. Blackwood's response floated after me. She already has been. For the past year, Eleanor had transferred operational control to Sarah, piece by piece. Today is just making it official. The massive front doors of the Harrison mansion closed behind me as I headed for my car. Not the flashy sports car James drove, but a practical vehicle equipped for emergency response. My phone buzzed again with hospital updates, board member congratulations, and a final message from Mr. Blackwood. Eleanor would be proud. I smiled, thinking of all the quiet afternoons spent in Grandma's study, learning the true meaning of power. Not the ability to stand above others, but the strength to stand with them. The courage to work in the trenches while building the towers. As I pulled out of the driveway, I caught a glimpse of my family through the dining room windows. Still frozen in their shock, their world transformed by the quiet one they'd underestimated for so long. The emergency alert system crackled. Multiple trauma incoming. All hands on deck. I switched on my response lights and pressed the accelerator. There would be time for corporate transitions tomorrow. Tonight there were lives to save. After all, that's what Grandma built this empire for in the first place.